Well, the news we all expected has come sooner than most imagined. The Acolyte will not be returning for a second season. But Disney, this doesn't mean we don't want more Star Wars. Much more on this later. So we have the news that The Acolyte will not be renewed for a second season. For those who enjoyed the show, I take no joy in your pain. Many shows that I've enjoyed in the past have been cancelled too, and it's a pretty crappy feeling. However, The Acolyte was doomed from the start. The poor writing structure and lack of interest in the twin story meant the show never found a large enough audience to keep the show's viewing figures heading in an upwards trajectory. Now, I've spoken about the incredibly high bar Andor has set, and although Andor's overall figures were lower than Disney would have liked, the show's audience numbers gradually increased as the show progressed. So Disney doesn't typically come out and announce a show's cancellation, but the article from Deadline exclusively reports that Disney and Lucasfilm have chosen not to renew The Acolyte. According to recent numbers from Nielsen, the figures were extremely poor, never gaining any traction past episode 1. These figures were not surprising to many, including myself. The show did see a small peak for its finale, but that's no real surprise, as most people like to see how the fire burns out. On social, and amongst critics however, the show performed okay, but the key metric has spoken, and far sooner than expected. So what does the failure of The Acolyte mean for the future of Star Wars? There's obviously interest in certain sections of the fanbase with regard to moving away from the Skywalker saga. Yet, have shows like The Acolyte failed to prove there's genuine interest beyond the Skywalker saga? Possibly, but the underlying issue with The Acolyte was the writing. I refer to Andor often and for good reason. The discrepancies between The Acolyte and Andor are indescribable at best. For any show to perform well, audiences need to feel invested in both character and plot. From the offset, both were lacking in The Acolyte. We never spent enough time with May and Osha to really care enough. When they began to swap sides and struggle with their own conflicted feelings about their chosen paths, there just wasn't enough empathy established. Episode by episode, the struggle became harder. To put it bluntly, I really didn't care. I'm sure the actors did the best they could with the material they had in front of them, but the directing and previously mentioned writing doomed their performances from the beginning. Now, as I mentioned up top, the failure of The Acolyte does not speak to a demand for great Star Wars media. I ran a poll recently on the channel and it would suggest there's major concern amongst the fanbase for the future of the franchise. The poll would seem to suggest that the fanbase are waiting in large for Disney and Lucasfilm to course correct and start making content that will appeal to the wider fanbase. So the demand is there, fans still love Star Wars. What The Acolyte has proved is a demand for quality Star Wars. I have thoroughly enjoyed plenty of what's come out during the Disney Star Wars era. Rebels, Andor, Mando and more have been fantastic. It's important that the fanbase signal out what it is they like and try to concisely explain what it is they haven't enjoyed. Unlike Rebels, Andor and Mando, there were times when The Acolyte seemed to veer sharply from the foundations that made Star Wars interesting and unique. Tonally, the lore, the comedy, all of what made Star Wars so appealing from the start was non-existent in The Acolyte. Now, I'm unsure if there is some contractual agreement with George Lucas where Disney can't touch certain stories or characters without having to pay George huge sums of rights money. But the direction of Star Wars has to change and change quickly. If the reports are true, both Marvel and DC have made major changes internally in response to flagging viewing figures, poorly received films and shows, and the overall direction and voice of their media. Lucasfilm up until now seemed to be doubling down on every decision. I mean, who wanted a second Rey trilogy? But the news The Acolyte will not be coming back is very surprising to me, and I imagine it has surprised many of you too. This isn't what many suspected Disney and Lucasfilm would do. It goes against their aforementioned trend of doubling down. But the numbers don't lie. The Acolyte was an astonishing failure. High-end budgets rarely secure quality, but putting pen to paper to create great characters and story is where success begins, and the ink seemed to run dry on this one very, very quickly. So could the news of The Acolyte not being renewed mean a change in the tides? Hard to see is the future, but recognising failure is the first step in course correcting. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments, and for the last time ever, may the Fred be with you.